Since 2010, David has led Concentric to be recognized as an innovator in education and has expanded to reach over 250 schools and 30 districts in 8 states. Dr. Heiber holds a doctorate in urban education from Morgan State University. Dr. Heiber's passion is working with young people in general, but specifically with African American and Latino students. Dr. Heiber uses his personal story of grief, poverty, incarceration, and redemption to connect with students and challenges them to recognize their potential, honor their promise, and fulfill their purpose. He is currently working on his memoir, From Prison to Principal. It is my honor to introduce Dr. David Heiber to our club today.
It's truly an honor to be able to have a conversation today. It's not a speech. It's not inspirational, aspirational. It's a conversation about how can we get better. Mr. Barnes, I mourn for your loss. It's interesting is that every time I had an opportunity to have a brief conversation with Madam President, she said, "What are you going to speak about?" I said, "I don't know. I think it will come to me." God and the universe works in mysterious ways that we talk about Mental Health Month. And then Mr. Barnes shares his story of tragedy and understanding. And what I took from that was compassion. Recently had an opportunity to read a book, The Buddhist on Death Row, and it speaks about seeing compassion and humanity in everybody. So what I will share to you today has less to do with chronic absenteeism and more about stories in the journey that we all share together as humanity. I've had the opportunity to be able to start Concentric with very humble means, but with a dream and support and an idea and a vision and understanding that if you give everything you have, if you believe authentically and you're transparent, that somehow God will work in the spirit of what is good for what is needed and for the people who is needed for. I'm joined today by my son, DJ. David Lee Heiber Jr. He's a junior at St. Albans. And it's one of the things that comes with starting an organization is a tremendous sacrifice. When you're in this field, whether it's be with students, education, entrepreneurship, mental health, a lot of your mental health, a lot of your family issues, a lot of your family concerns, they suffer with you. You don't go this journey alone. And one of the things that suffered greatly during my journey, starting Concentric, and it's going on 14, 15 years now, is not being there for my own children, not being there for my ex-wife. It's sacrifice, and they go along that journey with you. And when we talk about that, we talk about what you're willing to, the price that you're willing to pay. DJ and his sister Cheyenne and Chantel, my ex-wife, had paid the ultimate price. They gave the ultimate price of time to allow me to do this work. And so now as he's a junior and he's about to go to 12th grade at St. Albans, it's my intention and my focus to bring him every step of the way so that he's exposed to those things that I would never have opportunity to be exposed to. So that's DJ right there. So that's why you'll see this young man right there. And I have also one of my esteemed colleagues who is much better, much smarter than I am, Dr. Ivory Tolson, a professor at Howard University. I think, pound for pound, the greatest researcher that we have going today. I was able to steal him, coerce him from being the chief of research at the NAACP. He is now leading our research so that we can tell the story of the students and the families that we serve. So Dr. Tolson, thank you so much for joining. Right. So we all talk about this thing that came about and we read. What is concentricity? It's a fancy word, right? All it means simply is putting students and families at the center of the education phenomenon, right? Literally putting students and families at the center of what we do. And it sounds really easy and it sounds very simple, but it doesn't happen. Education, like most industries, are very complex. It's very bureaucratic. And so the very people that are supposed to be serviced are students and families. And so what I was trying to do in 2010 by simply knocking on a door, and it's amazing, and I know Dr. Tolson can attest to it, and most people in this room can attest to it. A lot of times you find yourself at the beginning of your career as the youngest one in the room. And then you look up and you're like, damn, I'm not the youngest one in the room no more. And that's what I have found. I am 48, going on 49, by no means ancient, but I'm on the back nine of my career. And I'm realizing that. And it's how do we use something as simple as a home visit? That's very intrusive, very high intensity, about what do students and families are telling us why they're not coming to school. So chronic absenteeism is less about students and families not coming to school and more about why are students not engaged? What are the challenges and what are the barriers that they are telling us? What we have learned now through over 500,000 home visits, and we're talking about in-person home visits, and I'm almost 85,000 home visits in myself, simply knocking on the door and asking a question. And the question is, how can we be supportive? Many of you may be old enough to remember truancy officers and attendance agents, and they would show up from a deficit base with blame. That's not our approach. It's simply knocking on the door and asking them, what can we do to be supportive? One of the things that we've learned over 500,000 home visits is that families, parents, send the best version of the student that they have to school. They're trying their best. One of the things that we constantly say is there are no experts in education, regardless of the degrees that you may have. Remember, regardless of the experience, we're all trying to figure it out. By a show of hands, how many of you have children? And we're all pretty much educated. You shouldn't. I'm glad you didn't raise your hand, DJ. There would be a conversation in the car. If we, you know that, right? We have these children, and we're supposed to be educated, and we're supposed to know, but we struggle as parents. And this became even more evident during and post-pandemic. It became even more evident during and post-pandemic. I was trying to figure out, how do I support my son in this virtual space? How to support my daughter in this virtual space? And if I'm, as an educator, struggling, imagine the struggles that families and students had doing it who had no experience how to navigate this complex tapestry in this world of education. And so as we were knocking on these doors and we were listening authentically with transparency and openness, they told us what we needed to hear. One of the things that we did not do a good job of across the board historically through decades is we thought we were listening to students and parents, but we were not. We were listening to ourselves. Why? Because we as adults are the least likely to demonstrate transparency and authenticity. I did this exercise with my leadership team. So all of my leadership team is really well educated. They have honors. They have a tremendous experience. So I simply said, let's all go around the room. Let's take a moment. I want you to take a couple minutes and write down on a piece of paper words that someone who you have hurt would attribute to you. Let me say that again. That you would take a moment and write down words that someone who you have offended or who have hurt you would attribute to you. So not your representative, not your resume who would say all the positive things about you, but someone who you offended, someone who you have hurt deeply. What would they say about you? And so I got a lot of looks. A lot of people are not used to being that transparent and authentic and vulnerable. And I modeled it by saying, one of the things that came up was manipulator. I'm a master manipulator. I have to own that. I've hurt people. I've deceived people. But we all have stories. The question I would ask as we do this important work, what is your story? What is your story? The story that no one knows except you when you look in the mirror. When you're able to get that gut honest with yourself and vulnerable and transparent, then you can start doing this work of knocking on a door simply by asking a question, how can we be supportive? So as you look into that mirror and you are asking the question to yourself, what is your story? It's ironic that it is Mental Health Awareness Month, and we made this post. I'm not this tech person and stuff like that. I just recently got LinkedIn and that thing called Blink, that electronic card, because people were making fun of me. But as you're doing this, I simply said, how honest. On LinkedIn, everyone puts their best face forward, no pun intended. They say what's great about leadership. They say what's great about their accomplishments. Rarely do they say what they struggle with. I struggle with depression. I struggle with anxiety. I struggle with self-doubt. I struggle with abandonment, with losing my parents when I was a senior in high school, never grieving them, with the inability to connect with people because I have challenges connecting with myself. What stories do you have? What stories do we all have that we can share together to bridge the gap that has divided humanity? You may be asking, how does all this link back to reducing chronic absenteeism? Chronic absenteeism is not the problem. Student engagement, apathy, disconnectedness is the challenge. Students are bored, disengaged, missing caring adults that are asking them genuinely, how are they doing every single day, who have the courage to connect to them as the person that they are. You know, a lot of times, one of the things that we always hear back from students is, as teachers, and I was a teacher, I was a social studies teacher, I was a high school principal, is we have this expectation of young people to be able to traverse and navigate the complexities of adolescence in this world, which increasingly gets harder and harder to navigate as we get more sophisticated as a society, when we struggle as adults to navigate it. How many times have you taken the long way home because you don't want to go home? How many times have you had to roll over several times in the bed because you don't want to go to work? How many times are you navigating a difficult marriage or just difficult job experience and you struggle? But yet we're asking children who are physiologically not even developed yet, psychologically have a lot of different things that they're dealing with, and may or may not have the supports necessary to come to school and simply show up every single day. I'm not saying get rid of the expectations. I'm saying understand it with empathy, not sympathy, because we want to hold accountability, and be true to ourselves so that as we speak to students, we can bring our authentic selves to the work in which is occurring. You're connecting with students and families so that you can break down the barriers so that students feel engaged at schools, and that's how you combat chronic absenteeism. Mr. Barnes said it much better than I did. Very rarely, I remember on December 23rd, 1993, I did not wake up thinking that my father was going to die having a heart attack while Christmas shopping. I didn't know 6 months later that my mother would be diagnosed with a brain tumor and lung cancer. I did not know 3 weeks after that, the 42 track scholarships that I had received or been offered would be rescinded because I had gone into a life of crime. I've been arrested 27 times, and I don't say that with pride. I say it with humility, that those 27 arrests shaped me. And people are like, oh my God, 27 arrests. You'd be very surprised how happenstance can occur, how the snowball can happen, how the system can work against you. But if it wasn't for people who believed, if it wasn't for people such as Bradley Lane, Coach Cyrus Jones, Freeman Rabowski's of the world, who did not take a linear approach that if you do A, then people are going to give you B, and then you'll get C. Human nature does not work like that. Sometimes you'll give A, and then you have to go to T and go back to M or N and kind of figure it out. But you can only do that with compassion, authenticity, transparency. These are words that we use every single day in our organization, and a willingness to be open and unconditional. What stories do you have? What stories are you willing to share with yourself and be open and vulnerable enough to bridge the gap? There's a movie, and it's old now. I think it was 2003, 2006. I'm losing count. I'm getting old. That's why I don't even dye my hair anymore. I just gave up. It doesn't make sense every day now. Like, nah, just let it go. Do you all remember or heard of the movie 8 Mile with Eminem? Eminem. So there's a seminal moment at the end of the movie where Eminem, B Rabbit, is battling Papa Doc, Free World. And one of Eminem's, B Rabbit's friends comes up and is like, well, they know everything about you. How are you going to win? They're going to say such and such. And he used that as a pillar of strength, not weakness. So in his battles, and he had to go through 3 of them, he simply said everything they know, everything they were going to use against him, he owned it and he was transparent. There was nothing they could say. He used his vulnerability as strength, his transparency and authenticity as strength. That is the foundation of the work. Concentric is nothing more than the company name from concentricity. We did home visits because no one wanted to do them. We went into mentoring because when we spoke to students and families, what were we bringing them back to? We were bringing them back to the very same thing in which they became disengaged from in the first place. It doesn't work. So then we went into mentoring. Well, what is mentoring? It's this very nebulous thing that we don't have many definitions for. We had to put something to it. So I believe I'm the, and Ivory would argue with me, I'm part of the greatest fraternity ever, Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated, but founded in 1911, but that's okay. He's a member of Alpha Phi Alpha, 1906, so I'll give it to him a little bit before me. But all these organizations at their core, they talk about connecting with students and families from the community that you came from. And so that's what we did. We added mentoring because we knew we couldn't get the results with just home visits. And then we start doing mentoring. But then we realized mentoring was not enough. We had to go into tutoring. Students cannot read. Students can't do the work. You can't lower the bar. You got to increase the support so they can get there. So we began tutoring. And then to Mr. Barnes' point, what we realized is you could do the home visits. You could do the mentoring and the advocacy, and you do the tutoring. But how can you support people with mental health challenges? And I would argue we all have some type of mental health challenge in here. We all struggling. If we're honest with ourselves, we think we got it together. But I see the eyes. The eyes are the entry and the doorway into the soul. We all have challenges. Some of us are just able to admit it to ourselves quicker than others. So we began doing doing mental health services, right? And what I realized is, how do you do mental health services in an authentic way and in a way that's concentrated and unconditional? And all we did was go to the neighborhoods and get the people who had experienced those things and who had the opportunity to come out, bring it back and provide it. So what is our approach? Putting students at the center of what we do, wrapping around them holistically, holding them accountable, never giving up, believing in who they are, and what they can become, because we show up with our authentic selves. And God has blessed me, right? Like, no, we had to revise the bio because now it's Concentric Holdings. And that's because in August, and I truly believe this, that whatever God has for you, no one can be against it. And I'm a firm believer in that. Like, this does not happen. Being arrested 27 times, going to prison for 27 months, getting my GED and high school diploma in prison, getting out of prison August 9th of 1996 and going to the Lincoln University 9 days later, coming out, becoming a teacher and principal, and then becoming an entrepreneur. It does not happen. It has nothing to do with me. It's by God, but by the grace of God, because I've done everything in the possible to mess it up, but he won't let me mess it up. All right? And you just keep on plowing along. So after 15 years, and it's very hard being an African-American owned company. It's very, very hard. It's very hard, but you keep plugging along, keep plowing along. And last August, we received Series A funding from VC. So I didn't even know what VC was. I just realized it's venture capital. And there was a gentleman by the name of Mark Grovick, partner at New Markets, and he believed in what we were doing. And 1% of all VC goes to African-American companies, 1%. And we were in the 1%. God, won't he do it? And so now what we've been able to do is get that foundation to go from 2 states to now 10 states to now 13 states. It's kind of growing every single day with the simple belief that if you put students and families at the center of what you do, anything is possible. And this is where we've gotten now. We have serviced over 28,000 students and families simply by asking the question, how can we be supportive? Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. It was impressive and sincere and real.
Right.
And my question is, do you work through the school systems, or is this all separate from the school systems?
Great question. Working with and through the school system. So school systems are this. So when I started with a grant from New School Venture Fund out of California, and they gave me $150,000 10 years ago. And to me, 10 years ago, $150,000 was like, oh my, wow, like this doesn't happen. And it was supposed to be 3 years, 150, 150, 150. And it ran out after 1 year because things changed and stuff like that. But for me, it was coming out of the school system. It was, if I can't make it work with $150,000, I don't deserve it anyway. And some of my first contracts were like $2,000, $4,000. And I have this very salient moment in memory. Is DJ's sister, Cheyenne, who is about to graduate on May 28th. I remember getting some free tickets to the Kennedy Center, a show, and she got her dressed up. And she, after the performance, she went with me to do home visits because I was a one-man show in Berry Farms. Berry Farms is no longer there, I find out. But and she was 7 years old. And I just remember that. And working with school systems was very hard. Let me actually answer the question. But because I started working with charter schools because I didn't think I could navigate the bureaucracy of large urban districts. Now I only have 2 charter schools, and 99% of our portfolio is through traditional urban schools. But it's navigating it because we're providing a need. And so they fund it through a lot of different ways. Obviously, what we do know is that there's ESSER funding. The COVID funding is running out. A lot of school districts, DCPS is one of them, is going to have to deal with that shortfall. But I just read DC, the first work started in DC. And I have an affinity to DC. This is where Concentric started. And then it's kind of hard to be a prophet in your own land. So then you leave and come back. DC has changed. Like I remember using MapQuest. And, I was doing home visits in Trinidad, in Shaw. It looks vastly different right now with the development of it. But the DC Council is having a hearing right now around chronic absenteeism. That if you don't understand chronic absenteeism, and I would say student engagement, you'll never solve juvenile justice and the public health issues that challenge. So school systems are now being forced to do something about it. They can't, it's not part and parcel. So school systems, they always say statistics don't lie, but people who use statistics lie and mislead. School systems across the country will say our attendance is 90%. That's true. But both things can be true. You can have great ADA, average daily attendance, at 90%, and poor chronic absenteeism. And they both can happen. One of the things, it's a national thing now, the squeegee boys in Baltimore. I know Brother Barnes said he was in Loyola. So squeegee boys, when you go to downtown Baltimore, you stop at a red light and they're cleaning. They're called squeegee workers now. We put a term on it now, right? One of the squeegee workers who murdered the motorist was one of our students who was chronically absent. If you're getting robbed, if crimes are being committed, I'm talking about by juveniles, if you're having homicides from juveniles, particularly during the day, I guarantee you a high majority of them are students who are chronically absent. So school systems are being forced to do something with it, and they just don't have the capacity. So it's almost like, I know a new movie came out, but it's like 1984 Ghostbusters. Who are you going to call? Who are you going to call? During the pandemic, we did over 75,000 in-person home visits. That's because no one wanted to do it, because no one knew what you were walking into or what you were knocking on. So we work directly through the school. I'm starting to get long-winded. Good Lord. We work directly through the schools, yes.
So my question is, you talked about going and listening authentically. And my question is what you heard when you knock on a door, and part that goes with that, you said, how can we support you? And my wife's a teacher, and I know that schools get asked to support more and more and more, and a lot of that support costs money in one way or another. And so what do you do when people say, you know, it's rent or it's food or it's whatever it is, you know, and effectively it may be social support in some way that costs money. So my two questions, yeah, like you did a lot of visits at this point. So what are the most common things, and how do you support people when it's costs money to do it?
Excellent question. The question was, you know, what are the things that keep coming up, and how do we support that? So I'm old enough to say now there's not too many new things in education that I've seen since I became an educator in 1999. I think the depth of it and the sophistication of the challenges have occurred. So there's a couple things. So on the very surface level, any contract that we get, we give back 10% of our contract directly to the schools and the families. People are making, when I say people, organizations are making millions of dollars doing this work. You got to give the money back. You got to give the money, not just the service, you got to give the money back. The second thing is when you get that list of barriers, what you're trying to do, it's a part of a larger process of creating a menu of the challenges and then seeing if the school has it internally, can they meet it? And a lot of times the answer is, oh, no. Right. And I remember being a teacher. There's so many mitigating factors. And then if it's not there, how do we leverage private and public organizations to bring some of that?
And thank you so much. You touched on everything that literally my year is about as the president of this club, the youth, as well as mental health, as well as when something is for you, no one can stop you. Period. Exclamation point. So I appreciate you. We have a tradition here at the Rotary Club, in our club particular. We will plant a tree in your honor for being our speaker, and what a wonderful speaker.